Now, we do have Nokukanya Mtambo from South Africa to give us insight on the extradition of the Bushiris. Nokukanya?
Yes, thank you. Like I was trying to explain a bit earlier, I said I'd take you through how we got to this point today where we find ourselves with a situation between the Malawians and the South African government in a bit of a tough situation. If you recall, sometime in October, the Bushiri couple, both the self-proclaimed prophet Shepherd Bushiri and his wife Mary, were arrested for charges of fraud, corruption, as well as money laundering. They were linked to a case of 102 million rand in an investment scheme to that tune. And they were remanded in custody for 2 weeks while they were trying to get bail. They were eventually granted bail at 200,000 rand each. There were 3 other co-accused, but I'll leave those ones out for the sake of time and stick just to the Bushiri. So the Bushiris were eventually granted the bail, and part of the bail conditions were, as usual, would be that they would hand over the travel documents to law enforcement. They were also asked to hand over the title deed of their Pretoria home to law enforcement, and they obviously were not allowed to leave the borders of South Africa. In fact, their movement was only limited to Gauteng, which is where they reside, as well as another province, the Northwest. Now, fast track to Saturday, and South Africa is still, in fact, reeling from the developments of Saturday, where it emerged that Bushiri and his wife Mary had in fact skipped the country and gone to their native Malawi. Bushiri released a statement to that effect, saying that he was in fact in Malawi, citing safety reasons more than anything. He said he wasn't quite feeling safe in South Africa. He had a couple of attempts at his life, him and his wife. He also felt that he wouldn't stand a fair trial. He then set out a couple of conditions for the South African government to meet prior to his return to South Africa, where he would then stand trial. He set out about 5 conditions for the South African government, and among those conditions was that the state would have to guarantee his safety in the country. He also asked that the investigating officer in his matter be removed because he had previously laid a case against him and didn't quite feel that the investigating officer would handle the matter in a satisfactory case. He listed 3 others, and he said, these are the conditions under which I will return to South Africa. Fast track to where we are today, and to circle back to your question. 2 questions on everybody's mind, adding to your question. The first is, how did they leave South Africa? And at this point, I think the South African government, to be fair, is also still trying to figure out just exactly how they left the country, considering the fact that their travel documents would have been confiscated, or as far as we know, were confiscated when they were granted bail. So their visas and their passports would have been confiscated. So if that's the case, then how do you leave the borders? There were speculations that were circulating in South African media, social platforms, that Bushiri and his wife might have gotten a lift from the Malawian president after his official visit to South Africa, where he had met with the South African president, Cyril Ramaphosa, and he left on Saturday. So the speculation was then that Bushiri might have gotten a lift, or he was smuggled by President Lazarus Chakwera of Malawi when he left the president from the Waterkloof Air Force Base in South Africa. Now, both the South African government and the Malawian government have denied and rejected those claims. The question then still remains, how did he leave the South African borders? It's still not known. The South African government says it's still investigating exactly how he left, but their primary focus at the moment is getting him back. Now, that's a different story, and that's obviously very tricky on its own. It's not their jurisdiction. It's in Malawi. Therefore, there are processes and procedures that need to be undertaken to then have him returned to South African soil. Now, Faith, to answer your question, your initial question was, how far are we then with those processes that the South African government would have to undertake to get Shepherd Bushiri and his wife Mary back to South Africa? As far as we know, the South African government has issued a warrant of arrest for Shepherd Bushiri and his wife Mary. And obviously, there's another process that needs to be initiated and fulfilled, that being extradition. As you mentioned earlier, both Malawi and South Africa are member states of the Southern African Development Community, the SADC. And part of that bloc's privileges, I suppose we could call them, is that they can initiate extradition processes between the two countries. And so the South African government has also said that they have initiated the process to have Shepherd Bushiri and Mary extradited back to South Africa, where they would then face the charges of corruption, fraud, and money laundering. As you mentioned again, there is the question about what this would mean for the diplomatic ties between the two countries. That's very tricky. President Lazarus Chakwera released a statement from his office earlier today saying that he would not be interfering in the processes because the presidency's office is not tasked with it. It is, in fact, a matter of law enforcement, and therefore law enforcement would have to, undertake their own processes outside and independent of the president's office. And so it would be up to law enforcement in Malawi to work in conjunction with law enforcement in South Africa. Whether or not that will happen, when, at what pace, that's a completely different story. But in essence and in short, that really is how we got to the point where we are today.
All right. Thank you so much for that detailed insight, Nokukanya. All right.
Sure.